That's probably an hour to an hour and a half will be a regular meeting, and we will adjourn and come back at 2 p.m. for our regularly scheduled meeting where we vote and take official action on a number of issues in the county. Good to have everybody with us. Right now, we're down one commissioner. That would be Commissioner McDaniel, and I'm certain she'll be here momentarily, but the rest of us are here, all in our places with sunshiny faces. Ashley Sloop, the clerk of the county commissioners, is set and ready to go, and county manager is with us. So is our Gordon Watkins, who is our county attorney. Having said all of that, delighted to have everyone with us. And I will turn the meeting now to our Vice Chairman, Don Martin.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to be here. I will admit that I have a bad head cold today, and that's why I'm wearing a mask. I've been sneezing for about the last 36 hours.
Oh, my.
So anyway, today we're going to we only have one discussion item, and we're going to look at ARPA funding round 2, American Rescue Act, Program Act money round 2. And we will begin by turning that over to the county manager, and when we're finished with this part, we'll recess until the 2 p.m. So, take it away, Mr. County Manager.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman, Mr. Chairman, and members of the board, and good morning. So, we are really here as an extension of the winter work session we just had last week, and so, or I guess week before. The one item we really didn't dive into was an effort to develop a strategic focus for the ARPA round 2 process. We went into the round 1 process as the rules were still being developed. I think we did it collectively, very purposely, around making sure that we made progress through all that period where they were finalizing those rules, and so that we could actually get some of those dollars out on the street. And so, I feel we made it through that process. It was a little bit risky because we were actually sort of building the airplane while we were flying it, and but I think we landed in a really good place. And so this morning what we have is we're going to do a little bit of just information sharing that kind of recaps round 1. We'll dive into it. Throughout that process, we wanted to try to do that work, understanding that there was a substantial amount of ARPA money that the city of Winston-Salem had, and then there was a substantial amount of the ARPA equivalent or ESSER funds that the Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools had. So staff's done some great work, I think, around doing a side-by-side comparison so that we can see what this $300+ million has been done kind of across the county, and I think that will help with a strategic focus around what we do in round 2. I do want to say that one of the things in talking with Vice Chair about is in order to help hone in on a strategic focus at the as we'll do our comments. This is really about hearing from you around what you think these dollars, what areas these dollars need to go into, not specific projects, but what areas we need to focus on given how these dollars have kind of come down to us. And so we are going to ask you to look at our list of focus areas, plus any focus areas you come up with, and give us your top 3, top 5, top 7 areas that you think the ARPA round 2 should be in. We will go into recess. We'll try to we'll try to score that and bring that back to you, hopefully this morning, and say, here's what we heard from you collectively around what those focus areas should be. And then really, if we can get there, I don't know if we can or not, but would be to say, okay, what order of magnitude do you think the dollars should be? So you got a focus area, and then kind of what amount of money, and then we'll take all that, bring that back to you in a regular briefing session with a plan. So our goal is going to be to hear from you, help develop this strategic focus, bring it back to you in a plan that we will then set out with an application process, an application period, and in a time frame that we can start communicating to the community. So does that sound
I just had one question. It sounds good. The main thing that went in my mind, that since we're covering so much territory quickly, will we have time, in your opinion, to take some mini recesses to discuss it before we get back and make serious decisions on it?
Absolutely. So the purpose of the recess really will be to allow you to do a rating. And so however long you think you'll need to do that, and then we can come back and present that back to you. If that doesn't seem to resonate with you, we can make another run at it. But it's very, very flexible. Absolutely. This process, if you don't feel comfortable with it, the other fallback is to do what we did the first time, which is really decide, we'll develop that focus as we get applications back in. And so it's interesting, I actually had breakfast this morning with Lee Garrity. Lee did, they on the front end developed some strategic focuses, and then really hadn't spent much of the money, but they did a very few things with the strategic focus area. They're actually getting ready to enter their first public call for proposals, and it's wide open. So they're actually a little bit doing sort of the opposite of what we've done. We had a very open first process, got some dollars committed, some substantial money committed, did that in conjunction with what that Winston-Salem Forsyth plan was and what we knew the schools were doing, and then we're kind of honing in on it in the second round. But my understanding from Lee was they've got a very open process in round two, or in their round, essentially their round one.
I would, from a personal point of view, mention that we are meeting at 10 o'clock in the morning, which is most unusual, but this is a most unusual thing to do this morning, and I think that it's in the benefit of everybody. But I've seen John Raley, a journalist who used to be with the Winston-Salem Journal, and of course our regular reporter here, Wesley Young. They're all in here, so it probably most of this will be in the newspaper very soon.
Yeah.
So to have them with us.
If it's satisfactory with the board, and that's sort of the plan of action for this morning, we'll jump into the sort of the information side of it.
Okay.
Sound reasonable? Okay. Again, I believe Kyle Wolf's going to drive the first part of the presentation, and Lee Plunkett's going to talk a little bit about our revenue loss calculation, and then I'm going to dive a little bit into, I'll probably step down and dive into the side-by-side comparison, and then talk a little bit about the strategic focus areas. So I'll turn it over to Kyle.
Good morning, Commissioners. So as Dudley said, we're just going to kind of go through kind of a little bit of where we started from and where we're at to get to where we're going. So just as a summary, as you know, the county was allocated a little over $74 million through the American Rescue Plan Act. We did have an application period where we received 176 applications, and the total amount requested was over $220 million. And through the last board meeting, so last week's board meeting, 34 applications have been approved, totaling $27,555,915. In addition to that amount, the board has allocated a little over almost $26 million for some administrative costs, premium pay, and the most significant part of that was the revenue loss calculation of $18 million. And so that gets us to our remaining balance of the $74.2 million that remains to be allocated. Almost $21 million, $20,845,438. And so this is just a summary by category of showing the total applications that were received by sub-initiative, and then also the number of applications that were approved. It also shows how much was requested, and then again, how much was approved. And so again, that gets that total amount of 53.4 million, which includes the revenue loss, the premium pay, and the administrative costs. And that's, and then you can see by subcategory how those have been approved by the board so far.
One question, please, Carl.
Yes, sir.
For the first line item, 39 that were received, but that were unallowable, could you just explain what unallowable sort of represents by definition?
So those were applications that were determined to be just unallowable through the guidance that we had from Treasury. I might ask Kyle Haney to maybe talk a little bit more about it, if you don't mind. Just
Good afternoon, Commissioners, or good morning, Commissioners. So essentially, we looked at those applications and saw to see if they met the Treasury's guidance and state law, and those were the ones that determined that they did not meet one or the other of those guidance.
Thank you.
okay. And so again, so the revenue loss was something that we had discussed a little bit at the winter work session. And so as you know, we had allocated about a little over $18 million originally for revenue loss. And the plan was to use that over 3 fiscal years. And so, so essentially a little over $6 million per year. And the final rule came out. Do you want me to have Lee go through this, or do you want me to go through this, or? Okay.
Good morning. Yes, so this slide just contained information that we went over in the winter work session. So nothing major has changed here. During the final rule, there was some changes to the revenue loss calculation, and so it yielded some additional revenue loss allocation available to you all. So the original was 18.2 million. You all have allocated that, and based off the most conservative way to do the calculation, an additional $8.9 million that can be allocated and spent on general government services. And so we would propose that would be on payroll for public safety emergency services, like we did with the 18.2 million. What that allows is it frees up some general fund dollars. So there would be, I guess, less compliance restrictions on what we'd actually spend, so we don't have to follow all those policies that you all have approved already, to the extent where payroll costs or just make it much easier for the compliance burden. And it creates some spending flexibility. So essentially what would happen is if we spent this $8.9 million on payroll costs, that $8.9 million would then be available through the general fund, so it'd be general fund dollars, and there'd be no ARPA strings attached to those dollars. And so that would give you some expanded flexibility on how you wanted to allocate that in whichever direction you choose. So that would have to come to you in a board item. You'd have to approve that in a future agenda cycle. And so if this strategy is implemented, it doesn't change the total 20.8 million that you would need to allocate towards projects or expenditures, however you see fit. Essentially, that allows you to say 11.9 million of that 20.8 will have ARPA strings attached. 8.9 million could not, if you chose to go down this route. Yeah.
Is there any reason why that 8.9 million could not be saved for future expenses in case the bottom falls out?
So it would still have to be spent, on general government services.
Right.
But as long as it's spent in the time frame of the ARPA grants of through 12/31/24, you can choose to spend it on whatever you like.
If I may, I think the answer to that is yes, it could be saved, because it's a two-step process. So Lee is correct. Initially, it would need to be spent on governmental services, which, as he said, could be salaries. But basically, that supplants money we already have in the budget. So that would free up the 8.9 million, and so that money could be saved. But in general, if you don't go through that multi-step process, you cannot save money from ARPA for a rainy day fund.
Okay.
I'd
But I
like to-
thought we didn't have to follow the ARPA restrictions on this 8.9.
Well, yes, ma'am, I'm sorry if I'm confusing, but if we go through the multi-step process, the answer is yes, we could save the money.
Okay,
And that could be defined as community transformation.
that's right.
Yeah.
And I just have a question about that really gets at sort of a lot of ease of paperwork and issues. I heard the discussions about capital projects that were in the last, several of the projects that have already been funded. And I was just wondering, would it, since the capital projects have a lot more strings, paperwork kind of issues, administrative load and burden, would it make some sense to consider these dollars for previous projects and kind of, two-step, I'll use Gordon's, the two-step process, two-step it where you take care of some of those capital needs that have already been sort of approved, and then you it's a lot less paperwork and burden to do that work. I don't know if that's worth doing, and I don't even know how much has been, what the total would be in approved capital projects.
Yeah, I'm not sure the total either, but I think that's an option. I mean, I don't see any reason why that could not be an option.
Yeah. The only downside is, something to just remember is that if you spend those dollars first, then you're gonna have to be finding things to spend the ARPA money on. So probably the good first step is to say, what are the true ARPA projects that we're really interested in? Because we know we've got 11.9 million that need to go to that. And then, because you've got a ton more flexibility out of those dollars.
Well, I understand that and agree. I guess the decision point would be how much paperwork is there involved in the capital projects that have already been approved?
Right.
And that was only hinted at in our discussion, that there's a lot of work, and that it's possible that some of the recipients may not want to do all the hoops they have to jump through in order to do it. But I guess that's what I was kind of getting at in terms of, I think it's order of magnitude of how much work you have to do it. But I agree with the flexibility.
And I think just one other thing to add. So we've asked the Treasury for additional clarification. They weren't particularly helpful. So there might be some future guidance that comes out that changes the calculation. And so that amount could technically maybe even get larger. It's hard to really say right now. But the 8.9 is a conservative number that we have at the moment.
Just a related question, Lee. What's the impact of the emolument clauses from the state on funding capital projects or capital-related projects?
Good question. I'll probably refer to Gordon on that one.
It still applies, and so that's what complicates this whole process, because you have federal people saying you can spend the money on X, Y, Z, and then the state says, well, no, you actually can only spend it on Y and Z. So the emolument clause still applies, and that's why we're structuring all of these agreements as services being provided to either the county or to the community.
So Lee, I have a question relative to the revenue loss, the $8.9 million, and you denoted that it was for public safety and EMS. We've given a lot over this time that I know of relative to those two departments. And for me, I would like to kind of see the justification around their budgets to provide the increase. Not saying that they don't need it, but we keep revisiting the same departments in essence. So I'd like to just see that kind of spread abroad to our least workers that are here, like our janitors. So I'd like to see that. So I just wanted to mention that I'd like to see the budget for justification.
Just to be clear, Commissioner, and Lee can correct me if I'm wrong, we're not talking, right now, when we're talking about a revenue loss, he's not talking about extra money to those departments.
So the $8.9 million is for revenue loss for the county but I thought I heard him say,
So what you can do, and again, this is the two-step process, you can apply that against salaries that are already in the budget. So you could apply it against sheriff's salaries, EMS salaries that are already in the budget. And then that savings you could use to fund, the Community Transformation Fund or whatever you want to put that.
yeah, so that's what I'm getting to. I mean, in order for me to do this, I want to see the justification around that, because I think that, didn't we do some salary increases around EMS already?
I will add just the reason why in this strategy that we propose those two, they just have the largest amount of payroll costs. So it really is not, like Gordon was saying, adding to or providing any extra benefits to those departments. It's just,
This
you
is,
have to
Taking the
spend it
loss
on
of what
government
you've already
services.
paid.
Yeah,
Okay.
But
it's
this
not
is-
any additional services for them.
Yeah, it is an accounting machination is what this is. We are, instead of charging current budgeted salaries to the general fund, we're going to charge those to this fund, and they won't be spent in the general fund.
Okay, fair enough.
That really goes to that question. Also, the point Commissioner Wisenhunt made is, once you do that, there's lots of things you can do with that. If you remember what we did with the strategy on the revenue loss, the first time for the 18 million is we are including $6 million. The current budget has $6 million of that in it. This next budget we do will have $6 million in. The third budget will have $6 million in to balance that budget. And so you're essentially giving that money back to taxpayers in a way.
I got
Never mind that what partly made that happen was the fact that we raised the rate to deal with the programmed debt service piece previously. And so there is a reckoning that will occur in 2025, FY '25, where there will be a $6 million gap that's created from this dependency on this revenue loss.
Okay,
So,
I understand that, and I do like the strategy around the opportunity to create the community transformation, so, thank you.
yeah, I appreciate spending some time on this because this is complicated. At the end of the day, we looked at it at the staff side and said, let's make sure we disclose all of this, but in the grand scheme of things, you got $20 million. Plus a little bit, but, and how do we want to invest those dollars?
And I apologize for just being a tad bit tardy when you talked about the city and what the city was doing. But one of the questions that I had was the city not putting together a committee of community individuals to come up with the approval of those nonprofits that they were supporting?
My understanding is they handed that off to the United Way under contract. Does that resonate?
They do have a contract with United Way for, I think that is for their nonprofits. I know in their annual budget process, they do have a committee, a citizen committee that looks at and makes recommendations to the council on applications that come in. And I've never, haven't paid that close attention to see, how closely the council sticks to those recommendations. I think they follow it fairly close, but I'm not positive. But I know that they do have that for their annual budget process.
And I think that begs a thought and some discussion around in phase two. Do you want, we did round one with committees of reviewers that were really county staff across the departments, and we brought folks from the outside in for certain areas for some expertise, but we really did it at the staff level. Other options include, as we go into the round two, we could hire outside reviewers, maybe perhaps from the university systems who have some subject matter expertise around some of the areas. We can you could put together the blue ribbon type groups. This board has never I think views representative democracy a little differently than the city does, and that y'all were elected to make some of those decisions, and been a little more reluctant really to defer those to those blue ribbon type committees. But
I think that possibly it's 7 of us, maybe we could all make one recommendation apiece to that group
Okay.
that would give us some balance and could speak from our constituency.
Yep, I think that, at the point where we get sort of the focus areas nailed down, then I think process is the next thing we need to make sure y'all are okay with where we are on that.
Thank you.
You want me to do this one? Yeah, let
If
me,
you want to, I mean, I'm happy to walk through.
yeah, let me
it.
jump down because I actually folks, and maybe I can help. So, what you have is a very large, blown-up version of this in front of you. We've heard that's important and taken a few licks when we haven't done that, so we wanted to make sure that you have that. So let me just kind of run down, and Kyle and his staff have done a great job with this. You know, from the get-go, we wanted to make sure we were doing this kind of in concert with, you know, what are the schools doing with the $220 million that they've got of ESSER dollars? What's the city of Winston doing with their dollars, and then kind of where are we? The community college was not as big of an issue because most of their dollars really went into student support, you know, through that period. But, you know, so if you look down the bottom right, you know, we're talking about $319 million that came into this community and that is coming into this community in terms of an investment. I will say that when I spoke with Lee this morning, he wanted me to remind you that they have not made a lot of, these were the original priority areas, and he validated that this is accurate, but he also said it is subject to change because they've got a substantial number of dollars that really haven't been allocated to a specific project yet, and so they are just getting going with that. But if you look at it, clearly, I think we need to rename it County of Arts and Innovation instead of City of Arts and Innovation. This board appropriated some significant dollars for arts and tourism. We were working on those contracts. You know, I think that over the next 2.5 years, this will increase a lot of vitality into the community and really give the community a focus that both from the tourism perspective and also just with arts activities that we've really not seen this many dollars in this short period of time that will go be in addition to the fundraising efforts that the Arts Council, I'm sure, is going to make every year like they always do. So a lot of dollars there. Affordable housing, from the get-go, we said, you know, that was really in the municipalities lane. So I think we took 6 projects and sent them over to the city of Winston. One of them was in Louisville that was an affordable housing project. And so the city of Winston has an additional $10 million that they got in direct state appropriation. So you can kind of see where that is. The sort of subcategory of that, which has really been the county's focus around affordable housing, if you think about it, is because it is difficult to figure out how to accurately, efficiently invest in a housing project to see where the low-income beneficiaries are. If you think about a lot of the City of Winston projects, you know, they'll reserve, you know, 10% of the units for low and moderate income or something like that. You know, so you've got an infrastructure that has to be in place to do that. And most of the time, you know, if the investment is in a loan, a low-interest loan, or maybe a loan that doesn't even have to be repaid, you know, the subsidy there is really driven by the lower developer's costs. But inevitably, you're going to get caught into a discussion about, well, how much profit does the developer take out of that? Is that increasing profit to the developer? And so how you do, you know, the world is struggling with affordable housing, and communities are struggling with affordable housing, you know, particularly in the home ownership model. But clearly our focus has been trying to get folks to have the financial literacy, the savings set aside. Ours has been the individual development accounts. And we've got a waiting list of folks who are ready to buy homes, and now we're just struggling with the affordability question. So how you tackle that is tough. We sort of handed that off to the city to make it more of a municipal effort. And really our efforts need to be and have been really around workforce development and trying to get people, you know, the education piece and really working on the root cause of that, which is income, and that's really driven by education. Behavioral health support, you can see the schools had a lot of that was really a function of investments that they made to make sure that their students were, from the behavioral health supports were there for the students. So lots of investment in there. I think Superintendent McManus is going to be in front of you at the end of March, and she can talk specifically about where those dollars are. Our number in just sheer ARPA dollars, the $3.4 million. But if you think about our other investments, we've got a state SCIF grant that came through with $12.5 million that's going to be going into that. So add that to that. Our regular annual appropriation of a little over $4 million into the behavioral health world, and now we get the opioid funds are going to come into that. So there is just in terms of a priority area, don't look at that and think we're only spending $3.4 million. Add another 12.5 to it, add another 2 probably to it, and then restructuring how we do our maintenance of effort dollars. Educational attainment, we pushed many of those applications off to the Winston and Forsyth County Schools. They are undergoing a process funding some of them now, but Superintendent McManus will review what they did with the ones that we sent over there. We obviously still funded some pretty significant projects that were up under the educational attainment arena, but those are also in addition to. If you add the debt service, the $200 million that comes from this organization to the schools every year to fund schools, so, which is a large part of our budget. Food, nutrition, health, and wellness, fairly low number there. And if you see it, the city of Winston didn't have, some of that's probably some categorical type things, but one thing that to me was a little bit missing in some of the applications, and maybe this is an area, is particularly around the wellness area. I'm on the Healthcare Access Board, and that Healthcare Access is that very quiet effort by the 2 hospital systems to create an insurance program for people who do not have insurance, and it leverages the generosity of physicians, and so they're sort of the clearinghouse of benevolence and philanthropy from the doctors who say, I'll take 20 patients through healthcare access who are indigent, and I'll take those, and the doctors in the community. It basically gives those communities a kind of a medical home. So I was really interested. We didn't see some of those kinds of programs that are coming in, but I think something to think about strategically as we think about this one is Medicaid transformation around it? Is Medicaid expansion around the corner? What's that going to do to the community? And maybe is there some kind of stopgap thing that can happen around this particular issue that bridges all that together? Maybe it seems like to me the planets are lining up a little bit around that in this particular area. And there are lots of agencies that are doing it. We house in the Highland Avenue Center the joint clinic that Baptist and Wake run there. There's some opportunities there that have not been fully realized. So that is one area that is of interest to me, I think, as we move forward. Gun and gang violence, you can see we initially sort of identified a partnership with us in the city of Winston on that. That has played out, and I think we're on pretty good pathway for that to play out pretty well. Public health support, you can see it was kind of even across us and in the city of Winston. One thing to remember there is we have got millions and millions of dollars for public health through CARES Act. In every meeting almost you get an appropriation from the state, which is probably ARPA dollars from the state, because our system of health and human services state administered or state supervised, locally administered. And so it bugs me every time you see the state putting dollars out there. Well, they don't really do anything. County health departments do it all. And so my suspicion is as we move into that one, there's going to be more state money coming down. It doesn't look like it's really slowed, and it actually could speed up, I think, because the state's going to realize that the health departments are what do all those things for them. And so would that be accurate, you think? Yeah, thanks, Chantel.
Bill, I had a related question, if I could. I was over at University Place yesterday trying to prevent an 80-year-old man from being evicted.
Wow.
And I blame myself because I'd never been there before. But I walked through that building and I saw some serious mental health concerns. And the supervisor on staff said she's working the building by herself. It's not just one building. Wow. It's several locations in there. And she said her staff person quit. I said, you should call your team down in Charlotte and get them on the case, because one lady went into the elevator and had to use the facilities, and she chose the elevator to do it. And then she walked right back out as if nothing had happened. And so I walked through the place a little bit, and there was a little odor in the place, and I said, this is not fair to these senior citizens at all. And I didn't get a chance to, try to address that on some level with the mental health capacity we have in the county, but there's a serious need, because to me it was an endangerment for these people to be living over there like that, and really no staff to support their mental conditions. And people just walking through, talking to themselves, and I have a soft heart. So I said, my God, we got to do something to address this. So I don't know if the public health support would include some kind of mental health component, but we desperately need to address it on some level.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a regulated program through State Division of Facility Services, but the Home and Community Care Block Grant, the ombudsmen that actually do that work go into those facilities, and then DSS responds to complaints around that. There might be some real opportunities around that.
Yeah, what I could say, I could talk to you about that specific situation offline and see if that's something we need to investigate or get involved in.
Okay, thank you.
Clearly adult protective services and some other, there's a couple of areas that could actually play into. So rental utility and financial assistance, we're showing $379,000 that was included in that one. The city's showing $7.1 million. Those were a lot of those grants that kind of went through United Way. I think what's missing there that we need to keep in mind is we had almost $15 million or more in ERAP dollars that was also in this category. So there has been a lot of funding that has flown through rental assistance, utility assistance, financial assistance through this community. And so don't look at that and think, well, we're not doing what we need to do. Lots of dollars have flowed through there. Do you know the status of those dollars?
No, but I can have it probably at the next break, but certainly lots of money for ERAP. We had the water assistance program, which we received additional dollars for that. That'll be coming before the board today. So lots of assistance with that for our community. Plus nonprofits are sitting on a lot of money for rental utility assistance as well.
So I did have a question about that, because I believe that I heard that the city had exhausted all of their funds. Is that true?
Yes, for the ERAP program, the city did exhaust their funds, but our funds can be used for both city and county residents, and so we are doing that.
Fair enough. Okay, thank you.
And that turned out to be a really good collaboration, because if we'd have been having two systems there, it would have just been a disaster. So.
Yeah, so I'm just going to backtrack on the situation with Commissioner Elamine. I am aware of that, and I just don't understand if we're not getting the information out there to the public for them to know that we're here in the building and we're right next to the eviction court. So I don't know what's happening as far as the communication is concerned.
What I will say is we do not have a lack of applicants, so I have a hard time understanding why people wouldn't know. Mailers went out to individuals. We have a table set out outside of eviction court. We have a lab at DSS. We have phone. We have online, and we do not have a lack of applicants. We probably will exhaust our funds by the end of this year, if not sooner. So the volume that we're receiving is very high, so a lot of people are taking advantage of it. So I can't really speak to that particular situation, but there's not a lack of people who don't know.
Okay, we'll talk offline about how we can help those individuals, but thank you.
And Dudley, I did look at the ERAP stuff this morning, and so just for the county stuff, not including the city portion, like the sole that was designated just for the city, but for the county, we've spent a little over $12 million so far on ERAP.
So there's some substantial funds there. And I wanted to spend a little time with this because there are other factors, obviously, that are at play here. Water and sewer, was one of the sort of categorically eligible areas in the final interim rule and the final rule. We got $500,000 there. That was really for the project that we had. That was we had lots of conversations with this board about. Up in the water line there. This still may not get spent because if the state appropriation that came through is sufficient, and we would spend that money first and then be able to come back to this. But other projects really haven't emerged. Some of the ones that did were purely economic development, industrial type projects, and so I think the sense was that there are other dollars that ARPA money really wouldn't be the best for that. Small business support, you can see where we were and where the city was on the small business support piece of it. I think we had good projects funded. The trick there is just the complexities of how you support them without it being an emolument. And so I know in CARES Act 1, the challenges that we had in the audit and review of that were the accounting for it after the Greater Winston Inc. got the dollars and making sure that that's just a complex area to be in. But workforce development support, obviously, that's where we focused a lot of energy in round one, and so you can see that, and that was sort of our area of focus that we took over, and the schools, obviously, and City of Winston was not as involved. Long-term closures, helpline security, and all that was sort of a category by itself to the schools. Digital equity, I'm going to talk about in a little bit. The City of Winston has $5 million set aside for that. The schools, that $24.7 million, that's all the effort that was out there to try to get accessibility into homes so that the students could learn while they were, while the schools were not in session. So obviously that was going to be a big number. We thought of that as digital equity because that really was putting connectivity into homes for folks. The digital equity plan, you have a copy of it. There was an outside party that came in and did the digital equity plan for the community. There was a lot of folks that were involved in it. There was a fairly substantial request from the digital equity group that had sort of two parts to it. Part of it was access for low and moderate income households who don't have access and how to do that. And then the other part of that was really building out systems, ISP systems in the county, which General Assembly, we've struggled with a little bit. I do have a short presentation that Kyle Haney's going to do when we get into that side of it, because we have received one request from a digital service provider who is asking to put internet capability into an area. He's leveraging a state grant because there were some state dollars. I think it's called the GREAT program. Kyle's going to talk a little bit about that, but if that's something we want to pursue, that's an option for the board as well. The rest of administrative expenses, you can see, I felt pretty good about where we were on that because we were a lot lower than everybody else. And then revenue loss, our $18 million, we talked about the plan that we had for that, which is really just a budget and financing plan. So let me real quickly, because we need to be quiet as staff and let y'all sort of think through everything that you've heard, and then we really want to hear from you. The potential strategic focus here is all this is a list of what I heard from different folks, y'all in the hallways, and as we were talking through things. Vice Chairman Martin serves on a pre-K group, presented that to the board in the winter work session. And I know there's lots of work done on that. And so I think as we get into discussions, Dr. Martin's taking the lead on that. Digital equity, if this is the point where I could get Kyle to come up and just real quickly present the proposal that we have. and then I'll jump to the rest.
Good morning, Commissioners. So this is a proposal that kind of came to us very quickly. I learned about it on Monday, but it has a short timeline because it's applying for a state grant where the application is due on April 4th. Essentially, a company named Brightspeed, which is acquiring the assets of Lumen CenturyLink, is planning an expansion of fiber internet to areas in the county that aren't currently served by that. And they have a significant plan already that they're going to privately fund, but there are some houses or residences along those, outside those service lines that they would not plan to serve because it's a higher cost to serve those houses. There are 208 residences there. They're primarily located in and around Walkertown and Kernersville, but really just the cost of putting that infrastructure in didn't make economic sense for them. Those residences would be eligible to be funded through the state grant, but it's a competitive application process, and they essentially believe that to be competitive themselves, they would need county support, which gives them extra points, and specifically ARPA support, which gives them extra points from the county. So wanted to bring that forward to you. They asked for $25,000. The total project cost for that is $343,000, with the state covering $240,000. The request of the county is $25,000. Once again, this came to me this week, and I think based off of the schedule, we would have to approve it next Thursday to be able to meet that grant cycle. But it is the type of request we may get, so I wanted to bring forward and just let the board make it forward. Eventually it's Brightspeed is the group. BRIGHTSPEED, and they're in the process of acquiring the assets of Lumen CenturyLink.
Is it a local company? Oh, I'm sorry.
They exist, and they are going to be headquartered in Charlotte. So they'll be headquartered in North Carolina. I believe they are in 48 states at this point. They, as part of just their business process, they are going to commit $2 billion to upgrading fiber in a lot of different areas. And so, they have a plan to upgrade a lot of area in Forsyth County already, but this is really, they were seeking some state funds for specific areas where it would just be more difficult to put the infrastructure in. Yes, sir.
Is it their belief that the $25,000 will make it more likely that they will receive the state dollars?
Yes, sir.
Has somebody advised them of that effect?
Yes, sir. And so it's a points-based system. Essentially, you get 1 point if you have a local government who puts money in. You get 2 points if that local government commits ARPA, their ARPA allocation. And so they looking at just the points, they thought they'd be competitive if they received that.
It's tricky. It is a tricky issue because the regulatory environment around where these folks operate in, and we all know that AT&T and Spectrum both invested a lot of money, AT&T particularly over the last 3 or 4 years, spent millions and maybe more than that in this community around that. And so there's just a lot to it. We've had a number of companies early on meet to talk about, is the county going to identify funds to do this in the community? When you read the digital equity plan, we are actually blessed with really good coverage in Forsyth County. And so, we are not in the same situation that many North Carolina counties are in, where there's just not a service provider here. And so, the other issue that you run into every time you talk to them is nobody will let you see their map, and they make you sign a non-disclosure agreement before you even talk to them. And so that makes for a hard conversation. And I think there's a non-disclosure.
The reason I didn't show a map, they provided me a map, but basically said this information is proprietary. They actually gave me a spreadsheet of the addresses too, but said it's proprietary, so I couldn't make it public.
Yeah. It's hard to help when.
Is it not likely that, and I just don't know this, that AT&T and other large providers that have made big investments, have they received state help also?
I think I am not aware of, when Kathleen Evans came to me 7 years ago and said, here's what we're getting ready to do, I don't think there was any, I think it was all AT&T dollars. I don't know that they got any governmental support. We've all been in NCACC meetings where the number one thing everybody says is broadband, 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 broadband.
Oh, God, yeah.
And it is an issue across, it's an issue across the state. We were just blessed to have pretty good service.
So I just want to make sure, we're talking about 220 people, 200 and some odd residences?
208 residences.
208, and
They are, and those are located primarily around Walkertown and Kernersville. I think some would probably be within the municipal limits, but some are outside of the county as well.
And they're actually putting some of their dollars into the easy ones to get to, and apparently there's some in this neighborhood that are hard to get to, harder access, meet some kind of state definition, and the state's gonna go, did you say 240,000 potentially? You get an extra point if they get to our 25,000, which is probably conveniently about 1/10 of that. And could we not make our award contingent upon the state award?
Yes, sir. And, once again, Brightspeed is not closed on the assets of CenturyLink either. So I think if we did do that, we would want to make it contingent on that actually happening as well, and then moving forward with the project.
And have they revealed what their investment in that 208 home area is that's not included in the hard-to-reach areas?
I do not have that number. I can get that. In this particular, with these hard-to-reach areas, they would put in 78,000 of the whole project. The company would, the state would be 240,000, and the request to the county is 25,000. But I can get that number for you if they're willing to share it. Yeah, and they essentially, in that map, you can see it is a substantial commitment to fiber, and it's just basically off the end of the lines where they're building already. There are areas that are more rural and just don't have a high density of residences.
So
Go ahead.
I've always been confused about this. I don't know if it's affordability or access, or maybe it's both. But it seems to me, are there actual neighborhoods in Winston-Salem, I'm sure there's some in the county, that don't have access? I mean, you can get a huge satellite thing on your roof. I'm trying to figure out.
I can tell the areas that to qualify for these state funds, there's specific eligibility requirements. So they can only be served by speeds less than 25 megabytes per second download and 3 megabytes per second upload. So if they only have that access at that site, then they would be eligible. I'm probably not the best person to talk about the details of all of that, but
It's a long discussion.
Yeah.
Gary Kuntz, we'll get Gary. Gary is on the WinstonNet board. He was on the digital equity plan. The digital equity plan showed some of those maps, and I think so those are kind of connected.
Is this supported by advertising, or is it subscription? How is it done?
I think it's a subscription. I mean,
yes, sir. So it's essentially, just an internet provider. CenturyLink is kind of, the model. It's like Spectrum. They would advertise, and then you would sign up and purchase the internet. It's just that they don't have the infrastructure in the ground at those places to serve those areas without speed it up.
I hate to keep pursuing, but so the people have to buy a subscription,
Yes, sir. They would have to pay the internet provider for service.
and this service is going to be free, or is it going to be?
It would
What's the consideration?
just, if you have Spectrum or whatever internet provider, you pay them on a monthly basis, this would be the same thing. They just, at this point, the company doesn't have the infrastructure in the ground to provide it to that household at this point.
Sort of claiming it costs too much money to put the system in, and get back in subscriptions, and they want us to fill the hole.
Yes, sir.
Same as water and sewer.
Almost.
so we say all that because if that is an area of interest that we want to try to pursue, we need to do, you know, I'm not recommending unless we run in something to meet this grant deadline unless the board feels strongly about it next Thursday. My sense is there'll be some other rounds. I think the state's gonna have a harder time spending this money. We'll see what happens. I think the state's gonna have a harder time spending the money.
Can I just make a general comment at the end of that? It seems like we have an area of 208 Forsyth County residences that are not being served adequately by internet that people cannot purchase. That's an accurate statement. They cannot purchase. It's not likely expansion is in the works. There is another company, CenturyLink. These guys are buying them out. There's an opportunity for a $25,000 to help access 240,000 or whatever the number was from the state. Just big picture seems like that's probably a good investment because it allows 208 citizens to have access to the internet they don't have now, sooner than later.
Are they new homes too? Is it a part of a new home development, do you know, or is it actually existing homes?
I don't know. I'm not sure. It seems like they're fairly rural areas. I'm not sure. I can check and see.
Yeah, in the old days, we used to be a lot more familiar with it than I am now because we used to be the franchise authority for the providers. And so counties would go out and we would count the number of homes, and if they met the criteria, if you had X number of homes per linear mile, then the company had to, in order to keep the franchise, extend the service. Probably 20 years ago, the state, actually I think the Secretary of State now is actually the franchise authority, and so a lot of that kind of went away.
Yeah, but now it's delivered lots of different ways. You've got Starlink going up, it's going to charge you an annual fee. You got Hughes, you got Spectrum, you got AT&T, a bunch of other ones. It's not service that you need another provider. I don't know why these homes are not accessing either satellite or landline.
And you know, most of these companies are betting on the come. They're saying, you know, what's the growth of housing likely to be? We want to be first in. And my understanding is they also have some service area considerations where you know, there are areas that are reserved to be served by one or the other. And you know, there are certain circumstances where AT&T and Spectrum are available in the same area, and you can actually choose. And that's, to me, the best model where you actually interject some competition in it. That's how you're going to keep prices down. So, you know, one problem with putting in a single service provider in and then paying for it is how much rate control really is there in it. So it's a complicated thing. It was on the list, wanted to make sure you kind of you had some understanding of what we were dealing with from some of the requests. I think more requests are coming too. I think that if we dive into this, there'll be more requests. Other ideas that I've heard, just real quickly, nonprofit technical assistance and capacity building. One of the struggles we had is how do small nonprofits apply for these dollars, and if they get them, how do they actually comply with all the rules that are out there? I know of at least one of the recipients that were awarded last Thursday have already, they went to a training that was required, and they actually sent me a text and said, you know, appreciate the award, thank you, but we're not, you know, we really don't have the capacity to do the monitoring and oversight, and frankly, we're scared of this money. And so there's a little bit of that going on. So I don't know, that is not on that list because that is a fix. I'm not sure if it's the board's desire to invest some dollars in that, in capacity building for nonprofits. That's certainly an area we can pursue. Fire and public safety, I think, was on the list because one of the concerns after the state budget was that some of the poorer volunteer fire departments did not get apparatus funded. And so the question was, you know, is there something we could do there? That might be an area that would need to be funded in the community transformation side of it, simply because I'm not positive it's going to fit. Maybe it'll fit into an ARPA category. I'm not sure about that. Cybersecurity is a big area. I think it fit some ARPA criteria because of the amount we relied on cyber, on remote discussions and those kinds of things. So to the extent we can boost the county cybersecurity, if that's an interest. We are spending, I will tell you, I've seen a glimpse of it going into next year's budget from Gary. There are some things that we're having to do to shore things up because there is an all-out assault on our system. And so that's something that's got to change, and we got to invest in it. So that is an area of concern. Law enforcement camera systems in high crime area came from an email that Commissioner McDaniel had forwarded over, where there was real concerns in an area around safety and the amount of gunshots and things. I think this one was, this is the idea that, could you put a camera on a light pole? Is that something we want to do? Is that more of a municipal question?
And I also wanted to partner that with our local sheriff's department. I think that he is more knowledgeable around this, but yeah, something that he could probably look at.
Yeah, that very well may be an area. Mental health first aid training, we do a fair amount of that. Boosting that with some ARPA dollars is certainly a possibility. I think Commissioner Wisenhunt.
And is that not the mental, I mean, isn't that the name of a particular type of mental health training? I mean, I think I've heard it's that first aid training is like a brand.
Mm-hmm. It is, and it's
mental health first aid training.
Yeah, it's the training that law enforcement officers better be quiet.
Yeah, so it is a standardized training. We actually provide it for all county employees who are interested in taking it. I think Commissioner Wisenhunt was interested in possibly offering it to more community members as part of our ARPA dollars. I think as something that was discussed at the NACO conference.
Right, and plus they would like to add teachers to this program.
So the school district they have several trainers in mental health first aid training. And in fact, when I was doing some work over at the RESA in Wilkesboro, I actually hired some of the folks from here to actually deliver that training to school districts out in the Northwest. They have some good people that do that, and I think they're folks, they're trying to get every counselor, psychologist, a social worker, and all of those folks
Absolutely.
trained. Probably, whether it's reached out to teachers, I'm not sure, but it is, I went to a couple of sessions, it's very good training, without a doubt. So, I think if we knew the scope of where we're going on that, of who to get it and whatever, I think that would probably be a good thing.
Gary Kuntz is in the room.
Yeah, Gary, come on up if you will. Oh, yep. So thanks to Chantel, she reached out to him. Gary, we talked about two things that are in your wheelhouse. We talked about the digital equity plan and areas that really weren't served by high-speed internet and the specific proposals we're starting to see. And then the other one was really cyber stuff. So
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was working on cyber stuff. I was working on some encryption stuff for the ERP project. So what's your questions?
I think the first question is, the digital equity group presented the report. My read on that was that we are actually served in the community. We've got a pretty robust availability of ISPs in the area.
Correct, we do.
Yeah.
There's a statewide map that shows that Forsyth County is fairly well covered from an availability standpoint, not an adoption standpoint. And I haven't read the Digital Equity Committee's full.
Access or affordability?
There's access is really good. The affordability piece, I don't know about. I know there's some areas that struggle to, and that's somewhat defined by what does it mean to be affordable. And I think there's, and Kyle may help, but I think there's some definitions out there on that. I know from a speed standpoint, the availability was defined as at least or less than 25 megs down. So if you got 25 megs or faster, then it's considered available. Anything less than that, you may have it like dial-up or something, but that's still considered unavailable.
That's delivered to the point, not within the point that's delivered to. We're not guaranteeing that every building is going to have.
No.
In every corner that kind of speed.
So the maps that I was looking at that kind of blankets Forsyth County really is where is this available if somebody wanted to call up and order it, could they get it? And we have some areas in the county where you can't. what is not served, but overall, percentage-wise, is fairly broad across the county. As far as availability, now there may be installation costs. Satellite, I do not believe is included in that. It's local ISP providers. So your AT&T, your Spectrums, and Segras or something not Hughes.
Kyle presented, actually what happened is Gary, when the request came in from the ISP, I gave it to Gary. Gary met with them. Said, I think appropriately said, it's really more in Kyle's economic development wheelhouse, so send him over there. When you met with him, was the area that they were serving, was it an unserved area?
So which one? Because the one I met with them about was not the Digital Equity Committee.
It was Lumen, yeah.
Lumen.
Yeah.
So the Lumen area is areas that are not served. As far
Are
as
there
their
homes in it?
Yes, there's 208 homes in that that are not, well, when I say not served, they're 25 megs or less. Is what the availability is there. And so the Lumen grant was to put fiber to the homes in there. Yes, they're running, their solution is an all fiber solution, which is great. Ask them if they wouldn't like to come to my house, but they declined.
And then cyber was really the other question that,
Okay.
do we want to focus some ARPA dollars in cyber that would need to be connected back to COVID stuff and just threats that are out there?
Okay, so connecting it back to COVID would be interesting. There's certainly a lot of cybersecurity needs related. Now, I guess it connects back to COVID in as much as we've had to adopt teleworking. And I think the teleworking piece, the components of it are here to stay. So the challenge for us is, in the past, from an IT standpoint, we've been able to manage machines because they're on our network. And so we have a firewall that they have to go through, and we can manage that piece of it. So when those go off of our network, like out of our buildings, out of our county buildings, to Starbucks or to your home or wherever, then those are now outside of our what we call control points. So there are methodologies around securing those endpoints or those computers that certainly would fall under the the teleworking piece to essentially establish for what I would call borderless network. So we can guarantee the security of the machines, the access of the data, and their whole end user experience, no matter where they are. So that's the project I'm working on now. Certainly would love to do that. The challenge, and I think I talked to you some, Ms. Wisnott, the challenge on a lot of these services are they're more subscription based for the products, as most of the things in the IT world now are all subscription based. Even when you buy a hardware switch, there's a subscription cost associated with that. So trying to move the needle to where we need to be without incurring future obligations is challenging. But certainly we've got a lot we can do there. About the borderless network and implementing seamless security, no matter where you're at, is critical. We're working on it. You'll know when we meet on a budget request that we're working on it, but
These 208,
208, I believe.
homes, they don't even have cellular phones?
That's unknown.
I don't think cellular is considered.
It's not an internet provider. It is data access, but unless you're hotspotting it, it's not considered home internet.
Which, from the school perspective, their solutions were hotspots and really,
They have buses parking around.
Yep.
Right. So it's getting to be a complicated.
So from the grant standpoint, having internet access is more of a fixed base. I have it available and it's higher than 25 megs. It doesn't mean you don't have access to data, because a lot of places, like WinstonNet, we're doing our computer technology centers to where it's offering public Wi-Fi, so you can just go near one of those, even outside in it, and you can get onto the internet. But that's not considered a service for that person's home. So the cellular doesn't really qualify for that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Can I go work on?
Yes, you can work on it. Thanks. I knew I could put Gary on the spot and he'd do great. So you can tell yep, he always does. Other areas, so we of course were restated, because I'd heard, where are we in this complicated area of affordable housing I've already talked about, and then homeownership assistance, which has obviously been our wheelhouse for a long time. The other item was some conversation about, we closed out round one, we let folks know that. There were the referrals to the towns, the cities, went same for Forsyth County Schools and Community College. A follow-up of that, we've asked all of them, when they come back to us and do the presentation to you in their periodic presentation, to kind of follow up on what those were. And Kelly Hales, which is with the school system, is actually here if you've got any questions for her. She gave me the nod that the information that we provided was accurate. But if you wanted to dive into that a little bit, she can. She's actually got a presentation if you want to see that. And then the last thing I was going to just mention, you do have a list of the projects in front of you, the recipients of the round one folks. And so we wanted to make sure you had that to sort of.
I'm getting a little lost here. So we have our person from the school, what was the person from the school district going to share with us?
She is here if you want to see a presentation from her. And I see some head nods. So Kelly, come on up.
Can we take a break before she does that?
That would be fine. That'd be good. Can we take about a 7 to 10 minute break?
Let's take a
And while
7,
you're
10
taking
minute
your
break.
break, think
Okay?
about your priorities. So this would be great.
We'll be back. The recess we took a moment ago has come to an end, and we have the beautiful Kelly from the representative of the Winston-Salem Forsyth County School System wearing pink. Gary Kuntz is wearing pink. That must be the color of the day.
Yes.
It's good to have you with us.
Thank you so much. Good morning, all members of the Board of Commissioners. Mrs. McManus, our superintendent, brings greetings. She asked me to share information. She'll be here later this month with more details, but in reference to the conversation today, to share some information as to where the school system is with its ESSER funding and its use of funds. We know that some people are using the ARPA term or SRSA. Department of Public Instruction made it a little easier for us. Everything is ESSER to us, so it's ESSER 1, 2, and 3. And so what we speak about mostly is our ESSER 2 and 3 funding. All of our funding must be in response to the pandemic. So it could be in the mitigation of the disease and the spread, or it can be in response to because of the impact to our students and our families. So when we were developing our ESSER plans, there was tremendous stakeholder input. So it began back in March 2020. We sought that stakeholder feedback in response to the effects of the pandemic. We know that it was affecting families and students in different ways, and we wanted to be responsive to that in utilizing the federal funds. As we developed our applications, we also used previously collected survey data. When we moved to remote learning, as well as many of you know, there were lots of surveys trying to get input from parents and families so that we were responsive to the needs in supporting continued instruction of our students. We also had community meetings in April and May of 2021, and you can see the extensive list. We work in a continuous improvement cycle, and therefore we have online feedback that we receive at any time, and therefore we're able to make adjustments. Even though our budgets are in place, we are responsive, and how can we further assist students and families? So in the document you saw previously, we have the column for the school system. And then what this does breaks it down a little more. These are the allowable use of fund categories that we have through our ESSER funding. So you'll see a lot of the overlap of the categories that were identified before. We received our full 3-year allocation, and then there was some funding, especially with the mitigation of disease of PPEs. We used that budget more at the beginning because of the control of the positivity rates and the spreading, and then also we move it into remote learning. So we do have our 21-22 budget, and as we presented to our Board of Education, our expenses as of January 2022. See through here that there are areas which have more expenditures based on the nature of the use of funds. One area that was noted in the previous chart, and what we want to share is an area where we will see more budget and more expenses will be in the area of mental health support for students. We know that because of isolation, because of anxiety, because of stress that our students are experiencing, additional support's being in place for them. So that is forthcoming.
Before you leave that,
Yes,
I got
sir.
a quick question for you. I'm just looking at what's been spent through January 22, and on some of those areas, as we have been talking this morning, the meter is running on getting these funds spent. Your time, the ESSER fund timeline may be a little different than ours. I'm not sure about that, but I was just looking at the second from the bottom there, activities related to summer learning and after school, program issues, learning loss. You spent 4.7 and you're thinking about spending 40 million, which is only 10% of that. And if those are the broad areas, the likelihood of having lots of money to re-budget or do something with in a short period, I'm just talking about leaving money on the table. And similarly, you go up a lot of the cleaning issue, your number 2 item, sanitizing and cleaning, if you spent 1.2 and you've got 48, budgeted, then that's an area that's very likely to have huge amounts of unexpended funds. So I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are on sort of the plan B so that you don't send a bunch of money back.
So I can give the assurance from Superintendent McManus and from our CFO, Andrea Gillis, funds will not be reverted. We will use the funding for the purpose needed. I'll speak to the first one in terms of the second to the last for summer learning loss and after school programs. That is what was budgeted. We were required to budget all of our funds in that first year, and so these were based on the estimates of what we thought implementation would be. That expenses of January 2022, that is mostly our summer school program from the previous summer. So almost $5 million for our summer school learning. Most of our schools at this point have now begun their after-school tutoring programs. So most of those expenses are not reflected in the expended funds. And the other part of your question was the availability of funding. So our ESSER 1, 2, and 3 have different end dates. And so right now, utilizing the funds where the grant availability ends before others is ensuring something that we may have put in our ESSER 3 application, and it is allowable in another budget that the grant is going to end sooner. Obviously, we're going to expend through that grant so that we are not leaving any funds there. Another one you asked was about the second one, which is repairing and improving facilities and the preventing of the transmission. That is such a large amount because unlike other federal grant opportunities, we are able to do capital upgrades in the area of air quality. And so what is budgeted here is for the repair and in some cases the replacement of HVAC and or its components. And so in that area, we've completed the RFQ process for the design work. Contracts have been awarded. Now the designs are being submitted to DPI, which is a requirement. So yes, that's a very large number. We're also very early in that process.
Okay, so what is and I understand your 3 different timelines. What is the latest timeline of, I guess, ESSER 3 that the funds have to be spent by?
2024.
As in December 2024?
Encumbered September 30th, 2024, liquidated by December 31st.
Whoa. I'm assuming, I think for us, I think capital projects can actually go beyond that if they're obligated by that. And that would help in that category of the second one. The facility, I know there's a bunch of air scrubbers and project HVAC. I do remember talking to Daryl some about that. But if those things are not under contract, I think I'm just concerned about that. And it's because as we're concerned about it, the meter is running on these dollars. I'll stop. Good. Go ahead. Thank you.
Sure. I do have a question, but if you're going to talk about this in some more slides, that's fine. But I wanted to share with you, and thank you for being here.
Yes.
I wanted to say if you could share with McManus, Superintendent McManus, that I would like to see the list of schools, especially the Title I schools, how many students were being served, and the list of the after-school and summer programs organizations that's working with these families.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
That is not part, I'm sorry, I was writing that note when you said that. It is not part of the presentation. My note was so I remembered to share that with Mrs. McManus for when she does come back to be able to provide that information for you.
Okay, that's
Yes.
helpful, thank you.
No, absolutely. As referenced earlier, some of the proposals that were submitted to you were referred to the school system, and that's become part of our review of what we're calling unmet needs. We have needs from our families and our students, and so now we're seeking additional support where our community has been so responsive to the needs of our students. We know that they are eager to partner with us as we progress through the impacts and addressing the impacts of the pandemic. So as the school year progressed, additional supports have been identified. And so the areas of unmet needs for right now is additional support in summer of this coming summer, 2022, and also in our 22-23 school year, specifically in the area of tutoring, which helps us address the learning recovery efforts, mentoring, connecting students to community, to adults, and it's in response to the time they've been in isolation, and even dealing with some of the feelings, the stress and anxiety that they're experiencing. After school and also before school care, we know that partnering with that supports families as they seek jobs or as they have their employment. And then also enrichment opportunities. Enrichment opportunities is a way to address learning loss. Learning loss is not only about the tutoring to help build foundational skills, but then also for students to have interests and, again, connections to the community. So the district will be releasing a formal request for proposals or an RFP in the coming weeks. And we are following all of the uniform grant guidance, procurement process requirements, and as many of you have heard and are experiencing, that they're specific, and we want to make sure that we do all of those steps correctly. Lastly, our next steps, as I just indicated, we'll release the RFP in an attempt to satisfy our unmet needs. Currently, the Board of Education is in the process of submitting names for a committee to have a ESSER advisory or community group. And the superintendent will be here with you on the 17th, providing an update on ESSER with some of those details that I think you are seeking in the use of our funds and in the response to the pandemic to our students and families.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions for Kelly? Yeah, really good job. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so
Appreciate your
much.
patience. County Manager, you are on.
So that really concludes our comments. Let me make sure and just look at staff. Anything that y'all think we missed in terms of sharing with the board before we kind of hand it over? Come on, I missed something, I know.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
On the, as you were finishing the list of potential items, I got a little lost in the very end. So on the home ownership assistance, you were talking about it, I want to distinguish that between affordable housing and just help me do that. And then talking a little bit about what the follow-up on round one referrals is, what that means. That,
Well,
what
I
you just
think-
said, finding out what the other people are doing, kind of issues and with that kind of thing. Okay.
So I think the schools really, she spoke to it a little bit, that, what I think I heard them say is those applications will flow into this unmet needs process that they're going. The concern that I heard from board members and why that was on the list was, we referred a lot of things out, what happened to them. And so with the city and all the housing ones, I think they are still in process there. But it was really on the list just I think what I heard was a question, if one of them does not get funded, does it come automatically back to us? And I think the answer is no, unless you want it to. So I think that's where that was. The home ownership piece, again, these were on because I had board members kind of mention them at different times. Home ownership assistance is there because really to distinguish the work that we do in community and economic development from traditional affordable housing in terms of affecting the supply side of it. What we know in terms of the issue that we have in the community right now around, or we feel that we have, is we've got 90 some odd folks, come on up, Kyle, if you want to. We've got 90 some odd folks who have gone through our IDA program, have the down payment sitting there, the match is available to them, and because of the housing market, and I personally have some concerns because one response to that was to increase the amount of home they can buy under that program. But, inherent in that is an affordability question about, the value goes up, property taxes get unwieldy, and then you're sort of in a tough cycle there. I spoke with Emma Souter with she's the director of both the realtors and the home builders this week, and talked a little bit to her about this, and said, her membership, her builders are not going to build an 800 square foot house. I mean, they are just not going to build that because the market and the profitability, they're going to be driven by profitability in that. And so we really do have a supply side issue. And, what I know is that, an 800 square foot home is a great starter home. You can add on to it as your family grows a little bit. If you hold on to it long enough and there's not other impacts on the neighborhood. You're going to make more, you're going to make some money on it, and you're going to build wealth on it. You know, but if nobody's building in that market area, that's who our IDA program really kind of is geared towards, a smaller starter home. And our marketplace just isn't addressing it right now. And so there is a conundrum we have. The solution's difficult. I'll let Kyle talk. It's frustrating from Kyle's perspective because how many more people do you teach and train and lead along an IDA program when there's not a product for them?
So I have a question. I know that we work with the IDA program, ESR. However, we also have the community development portion as well. So you can take a home and rehab it, correct?
So we have, there's a couple different programs, and not all of our home buyers go through the IDA program. Some, if they already have a good credit score and are qualify for a mortgage, but are 80% or below the area median income, we can just serve them with down payment assistance without them having to go to the IDA program. The IDA program helps people who need some assistance raise their credit score, get in the habit of saving, but some of the federal funds that we have also could be used towards home repairs. The restriction on that is it has to be an owner-occupied dwelling. Now, there are times where we do partner homebuyer assistance with repairs. One issue that we have there is that, technically we can use those monies in the city, but generally we try to avoid that because the city has their own allocation that they can use in the city. And so that limits us a little bit. But there are also limits to how much we can spend total in that. So it does restrict us from really using those funds in partnership with home purchasing. But I think, to the manager's point, in differentiating the affordable housing piece from the homeownership piece, there were some requests that are really about rental-based affordable housing. The cities actually reached out to us on some of those. And then, but we also, the program that we've been most involved with is assisting moderate income individuals purchase their first home with down payment assistance. And right now, we really have seen, I've looked over the past couple of years, 2019, the average purchase, we had about 25 people purchase a year that we assisted. It was about 150,000. Right now, we've got 5 people for this fiscal year, and it's closer to 200,000 plus that they could afford, or that they have to be able to afford. So there just really isn't a lot of product on the market below.
So does that sort of culminate the, our list? I guess at this point, just turn it back over to you, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman, in terms of sort of next steps and kind of honing in on what this round 2 looks like.
They put on an hour and a half or something like that. We're going to have a 2 o'clock meeting, so.
Well, could I just make an observation? As you were going through the big list, I was kind of putting X by things I thought, well, maybe they're a lower priority, and I put a little circle around some things that might still be remaining. And to tell you the truth, on that first list, I pretty much sort of put lower priority on everything, but we talked a little bit about the education attainment pre-K issue. I have a question mark on the sort of the food, nutrition, health, and wellness kind of issue. I had a potential for workforce development. I mean, that was a problem before the pandemic, and workforce development kind of support generally. And then the comment you made about the digital equity piece on that one little part, which also shows up on the other list. So basically, I felt like that first list was kind of done. And when you went through the second list of potential things, I put circles on most of them, except I put a no on the nonprofit technical assistance and capacity building. And part of that is just a personal belief that perhaps for getting funds like this with fairly large budgets and accounting, perhaps smaller nonprofits need to be partnering with bigger nonprofits that have that capability and have that capacity. I'm not so sure we need to spend money to elevate other nonprofits to that. And I actually gave that a little thought in terms of our applications, whether if grants came in, I think people ought to have had an audit, you know, you ought to have a CPA audit. If you haven't had one, you're small, and if that's the case, then the amount of funds that you should be able to get should be small. I mean, I just think if you're not in the mix, and then you're probably not into this part. And I also put an X on the affordable housing with the 30 million that the city's dealing with. And everything else, I said, well, on that list, maybe they could be sort of wide open. I don't know how other people thought about it. I don't know if we need to rank order. I don't know what people's desire to do that, but I was listening, and there wasn't much on the first list to carry forward for me.
Further comments?
I don't think we necessarily need to rank them, but I think we should choose the ones we're interested in. Everybody might not be interested in the same thing.
Oh, I agree. I agree with that. How many would you think is a good number for us to indicate interest in? 5, 7, sort of a top priority kind of issue?
Yeah, I think this exercise really takes us to, are there a couple of areas that the board really wants to focus on? But if you've got 7 or 8 items on the list, it probably leans more towards, okay, maybe we do kind of what we did the first time, which is sort of open it up and say, here are areas that, here are areas that we're, tell us what you think can make this community a better place and what needs to happen around that. I mean, so this, how much guidance do you want to give folks as we go into the next group? And that includes even county staff. If we're, if you feel like we've got enough in the human services arena that our plate's full, then, you won't see applications from DSS or public health. If it's wide open, part of the annual budgeting process that we go through every year, despite all this crazy money, is department managers saying, here's what I need, here's how I can make things better. Here's what I need to do my mission better.
It's interesting, we got this subject where it is today. It's my thinking that it might be wiser at this point, because we've reached a point where we want to decide one way or the other. I think that Commissioner Martin has offered a good idea. We could rethink this and come back very soon and decide how we want to set this up so it would be workable. What do you think?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think that our first process worked very well. I think so much thought was put into it. The team really worked hard. And then we met in small groups and went over it. I don't see the point of changing what we did the first time. I thought it was very effective, and I was so pleased with how it went. Just
Good comments.
If I may, Chairman, I feel a tad bit different, and I would say that we probably need to look at our processes and procedures. So, for example, when something comes out of the committee and it's recommended, I'm thinking of some things that Richard has bestowed upon me in terms of respecting what's come out of staff recommendations, is that we take that and yes, we have the final say, but again, we don't go back and forth and have these organizations kind of carted up. In my opinion, I'll use the word begging for funds that belong to the constituency in the first place. So I'd like to see a little bit more in terms of that. Secondly, and I'm not saying that anybody did this, but if Gordon has advised us that we sit on a particular board and we can't communicate about that, we need to abstain from doing that as well. So that needs to be a part of the process. So I would ask for those things to be added into our process and the procedures.
Mr. Chairman, I just say I generally agree with the way the first process worked. The staff spent a lot of time working through it and then got some input from the board members and ultimately made some recommendations. And then to me, that's a good process. And in the end, if the board wants to change some of those recommendations, the majority wants to do that, then I just agree with that process.
In other words, it could be, with what you're saying, we could tweak it to the point where it would make it easier to keep the process, but make it more responsive to the problems, needs, and interests that we're talking about today. Is that correct?
I guess it's, and then in the end, the board can change it or whatever it wants to do. But I thought they done a good job on it, period, as far as going through it and making recommendations, whether we all agreed with, and I didn't, in the end, I didn't agree with exactly all of it. Maybe some of the other board members didn't, but that still don't mean, because it was something I didn't agree with, that don't mean it wasn't a good process.
Those are good comments. Any comments on Commissioner Linville's thoughts?
Well, I would agree with Commissioner Linville. I thought the process was very efficient. They went through a lot of work and labor and consideration in this process. So I don't believe in inventing a wheel all over again if we got a wheel operating properly. And I know as county commissioner, we have a policy responsibility to make those final decisions on policy. No matter what the staff comes up with, it's our job to make the policy decisions. And I think we did a pretty good job on that. I commend the board for being sensitive to the needs of the community. And when I look at these numbers being distributed, how much money the community received, I thought we did a A- job.
So it seems to me, Commissioner Wisnett, did you have something to say?
No, it's close.
It seems to me that we're all in agreement that system and what we use right now is pretty much what we want to do. It just needs to be tweaked to a point where we don't have to get into this conversation. We can just go ahead and move on. What are your thoughts on it, Mr. County Manager?
I think that's fine. I think an open process is it absolutely works. We created a few sort of values through that around deferring. Let me give you an example. So, early in it, and I know I did it kind of in conjunction with you knowing that I was doing it, but we said, the affordable housing applications really are going to go to the city. That was a function of when we got the applications in, we started analyzing those, and we really did at the staff level try to say, whose primary responsibility is this? Is this our wheelhouse or not? And so, if we move forward, I think we would still do that in a second round too, and just want to make sure that that's still kind of where you want us to be on that. Is use some discretion in sort of assigning those to, if something's clearly a City of Winston project that is in their wheelhouse. In a lot of those cases, it almost got confusing if we got too involved in it and trying to figure out who was going to do what. It would just be so confusing. And so we can certainly do that. It's interesting, the city's not put a lot of boundary. First thing that Lee said to me when I sat down this morning was, now I think I know what it feels like to be in the social services business. Because I think last night he was in a room, where folks were applying for benefits, and so I said, well, welcome to our world. And so that there are some kind of things that are kind of crossing up here a bit. But yeah, I think this works fine. You know, in terms of the only downside to it is some of the criticism that we got being so open on the front end because we weren't real clear about what we said. So, you know, that is probably the only downside is people went into it with the impression that, you know, we were going to fund, some things. And so, I heard a little bit of frustration around, I spent some energy applying and I didn't get it or whatever.
Well, the topic has unanimous support, I think, at this point. I'm thinking out loud now, but why don't we, for the short term, table this conversation and bring it back at the earliest possible date with some possible ideas that may bring a conclusion of what we're discussing. Did you want to say something, Commissioner Alameen?
Just 30 seconds. Thinking outside the box for a minute. I've spoken to a couple of the city council people and some of the leadership in the community about us pooling some money as a concept to really get behind a major transformational difference in the community. And just food for thought. I know Lee had mentioned a few times and some other, quote, stakeholders in the community. Just giving a little thought to see if we can break down some old barriers of resistance, of working together. It'll make a greater impact long-term in the community, I think.
Commissioner Martin?
Beyond that, I wanted to make one comment.
Go ahead.
My 30 seconds off?
Sure.
You know, I see a list of things that we funded from Whole Man Ministries of North Carolina to the Arts Council. It's almost an insult to my intelligence to say that any of these groups had to beg before us.
Could you repeat that again?
Commissioner Martin wants to hear that again.
Let me be very specific, and I'll slow it down. We funded groups from the Whole Man Ministries of North Carolina all the way up to the Arts Council of Winston-Salem, and a number of community groups between the two. So to me, it's an insult to my intelligence to say that any group came before us and had to beg for anything.
Is that satisfactory, Commissioner Martin?
Well, I hate to be, I just didn't hear the very last thing you said.
Okay, let's say it one more time.
After the insult to your intelligence.
that any group came before us and had to beg for anything, or any funding sources.
You say did not have to beg for anything?
I'm gonna speak. Do you speak French? I can speak. No. Okay. Let's slow it down one more time.
I'm just.
Okay. Let's make it very
What we
clear.
said was important. I just wanted to try to understand it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Martin. I said that to me, it is an insult to my intelligence to say that any group came before this commission and begged for money. We were very serious in our deliberations. We gave everybody equal consideration, and I thought we did a fantastic job overall.
I got it.
Got it?
I got it.
All right,
I got it.
thank
I
you.
just didn't want to misunderstand. I got it. And I guess the only comment I'd make is to follow up on Dudley's comment that, I think when we did this the first time, ask wide open was exactly the thing to do. We had no idea what people would submit. We didn't have any categories. We didn't have anything. And I think we did create some angst, particularly around the affordable housing issue, because we had a number of applications that were strong. And that certainly did upset a number of people, which probably with a little more guidance on the application would have prevented that angst from occurring. And I think since we've had this, I think your whole purpose of this exercise and discussion today was to try to get to the application. Should we tweak it a little bit to the point that, these are the areas we funded last time, for example. These are some areas that are higher priorities this time. We'll accept anything you want to send in, but there are some priorities that we think are important, and here's some of them, and this is what we did last time. And particularly, if it's possible, there were 39 applicants that were unallowable. And that some of that was not looking at the materials that you were provided to them, with some of it. And the other part was just the guidance from Treasury, I think. But I think we'd like to eliminate some of those, certainly, and I think we would like the people to try to at least get a little more, so there's no frustration. And I think that issue, if affordable housing is not going to be on the table particularly, then we mention that it's not. and mentioned that it's basically, we'd encourage people to pursue that with the city, and we anticipate a third round, and that could be revisited again. It's kind of how that first letter, that first application beginning part, I think, is good. And I think the other part is whether you all, all of us here, agree with the size of certain organizations. I mean, certain nonprofits coming in with no audits, very small budgets, requesting lots of money. I think we should regulate that in some way to help, either encourage them to find a partner that will work with them, or have a cap on the amount of proposal that we would consider for somebody that's not large enough to even have an audit. Something like that. I think we can improve and the other little minor thing in terms of our review of those projects, it was a lot of data, and they were all in. So to read a proposal from beginning to end, you made about 8 different clicks on documents. And that takes a while to do that. And there's a part I was particularly interested in, and I kind of got down, but if we could, as we collected application, this is in the weeds, we collected information, I like the application, but to collect together, but Part D was the heart of it, and Part D, if that were separate, look at one document, Part D, and look at the detailed budget, which is in Part E, then I'd have a much better handle on what they're trying to do, and I could look at a lot more proposals and get a better understanding. It's a long process to click through and look at all of them, all the different attachments that go with the proposal.
Yeah, Dr. Martin, that reminds me, I work with about 4 different groups filling out their applications specifically. The concern I had was that there was no mention about the emolument impact on the application, anywhere on the application. And so some groups really thought they had a green light to submit what they submitted, not realizing it was a state restriction beyond the federal restrictions. And so I think that clarity needs to be made on the second one.
I agree.
At the very top of the application. And I had to help some people because they were not computer literate, so I just made a hard copy and said, look, let's just walk this thing through together. In fact, it was 6 different groups that I worked with, now that I think about it.
Well, it's pretty obvious that we're right where we want to be, and I don't think it'll take very much time to reach a conclusion. Why don't we table this until our next meeting and see if we can tweak what we talked about today amongst us and together with the staff and county manager.
Chairman, before we do
Yes,
that,
ma'am. Sure.
I would like to see where the temperament was relative to having a community advisory committee be a part of the staff's process and recommendations.
That's not a bad idea. What are your thoughts on that, Mr. County Manager?
And then my second question, thank you, Chairman Pryler. And then the second question is, are we still processing the applications through the resolution that we wrote about the 80% in the marginalized communities?
Good.
I'm sure.
Those are my last questions. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, ma'am.
I really would like to leave the committee the way it is. I mean, you start bringing in community leaders, and my fear is they'll show partiality to their friends.
No, that's possible.
What we did last time worked perfectly well, and
Would you like to make a motion?
no, I can't make a motion. We're not in a meeting. And also, I would like for us to turn this list in today so that the staff has some idea of where we want to go. I thought that was supposed to be part of the process.
Well, that's basically what I just said. I think
Well,
you put it in better
If
terms.
we can turn this list in today, I think it'd be very helpful.
Okay,
Mr. Manager, I'd like to say something.
go right ahead.
And just a little bit ago, you mentioned about criticism. Even though there may have been some, I still think the staff did a good job anyway. And if you come up with a way that we can do whatever we do and not have any criticism, you tell me how you did that. What I go by is years ago, when I got started as being a commissioner, I thought I could do this job, and everybody would be satisfied with it, because in my mind, I thought I was trying to do all of the things that I knew was right. Well, what I thought was right, somebody else may have disagreed with it, so I got a little criticism along the way, and I've just finally decided, well, I'm gonna have some criticism, so all I know to do is just do what I believe is right, and that's, so y'all done a good job anyway, regardless of criticism.
Good words, Commissioner Linville.
Sure did.
Can I take 30 more
Yes,
seconds?
sir, go right ahead.
I'm gonna count this time. 1, 2.
I have one other short question, and the short question is this.
Hey, I was talking.
He was.
Oh, I'm sorry.
He had, that's okay.
sorry,
You
excuse
could
me.
go right after.
It took a
Take my
long
sword
breath, I'm
out
sorry.
here.
It's all right.
Oh, no, I'm just kidding. In terms of the community volunteer committee to sort of advise us along the way, I think, in concept, it sounds good. I tried that. And I found that we had some people who had their own agendas in place. And so I think we'd be better served if we just go back to our constituents on our own merit and get them to advise us what their priorities were, instead of having an official board with that kind of influence on the whole decision-making policy that we make. I had about 8 people on the board. 2 of them several of them had their own agendas that I discovered much later on. So in my innocence, I tried to involve their comments. We met several places across town, and we even had a name for it. I forgot the name of it, but I did get the information to that lady. But you really lose focus sometimes with that, because everybody has their own agenda items. And I think this board, when we come together as 7 and we got to convince 4 to go along with anything, it's an ideal democratic process.
Thoughtful and robust. Commissioner Martin?
Yes, the only other question I had was this, and I apologize for interrupting. I didn't hear you speaking. Is whether the staff is comfortable with all the hours they put into it. Because I think you made a comment, Mr. County Manager, about, we've got, in this community, we got a lot of grant people. We got grant people at the hospital, grant in medical school, we got grant people at the universities, and probably some of them could probably do a screening. I'm talking about just a screening of sort of is the grant, is it fitting together? Does it look like they're, the things, their outcomes are consistent with what they've got the budget for? People talk about an outcome, and then you look at their budget. In fact, I did that with a couple of them, and there was nothing in the budget that seemed to suggest it was going to apply to the outcomes they wanted to. It would be that kind of review. And that also saves staff that first level screening process. If we want to do that, I suspect we could find some, I'm not talking about finding people, these are not folks, just community folks who are representing the community. They're people that are grant writers, period, in their respective agencies. They could probably give us a pretty helpful review. But if staff wants to spend, I thought we did a great job. I thought staff did a great job. Have no problem. It's just a huge amount of hours to go through another round,
Why
and
do we need an analyst?
we want to shorten it.
Well, my primary suggestion for tabling it was not to change anything, it's just to let your minds work. But does anybody have any other comments before we take another recess?
I would like to hear back from staff, because I think, sorry, I can't remember your name. Kyle and Alicia, Aisha, were in the community a lot, and I'm sure that you learned a lot because of that as well. So, Dr. Martin, Commissioner Martin, I do like that plan as well, but I just think that, you've learned a lot, but there's still opportunities to still learn from the community. So however we can help support you with that, I would like to hear the feedback, whether it would be cumbersome or will it be helpful?
Okay, well, I'll suggest at this point, we'll just recess with no instructions, but we'll keep this in mind and act on it if it's necessary at our next meeting, which incidentally starts at 2:00 this afternoon.
Mr. Chairman, can I take 10 seconds this time?
You sure can.
Earlier, I made reference to my effort to get an 80-year-old man some help. Let me say that the program downstairs processes application immediately. He was the second person I tried to help this week. That process works very smoothly. The problem was that once the check was written, the owners didn't want to accept it. That's a whole different ballgame. But I don't want to leave the impression that indeed our organization downstairs was not very, very efficient and very sensitive to his needs. And there was a young lady I took down there that lives on 3rd Street in those apartments. The house was no heat in it. I just can't believe people would do that to people with a child in there, but she got some ERAP assistance as well. So the process is working. I was just so disappointed in that senior citizen situation. It was close to my heart. All right, I'm done. That's 15 seconds?
You take as much time as you want.
So let me. Last thing. and
Oh, Commissioner
Follow up
Martin.
from Commissioner Wizenhunt. I mean, I just made a list of 5 priority areas. If we want to do that or not.
I thought that's what we were supposed to do and hand them in. Excuse me.
So let's do this. Let's,
Simple.
some folks may want to identify priority areas. If you do, great. Let's get those. If you don't worry about that. We'll know what we get them from. So if you want to get your priority area, if you've got those priority areas identified, you want to get them, go ahead and get them to Kyle, and we'll process that. I heard a lot of questions, and I think we've heard a lot this morning, and I do think we have some good guidance. Why don't we, at the staff level, go back, take what collectively all these smart people out here heard, and put together a plan and strategy based on this, because I think we've heard some real comfort with an open process that maybe has some broad areas. I do think that there will be much more guidance for the community in this process, simply because we know more about the rules now. To get to Commissioner McDaniel's question about the disproportionately impacted folks, that is still part of the ARPA.
You've done a really good job of settling the issue, and at least at this point, and I'd like to offer thanks. And we'll take a recess until 2 o'clock and take this subject up a little later. But on a lighter note, I've noticed, Commissioners, I don't normally notice stuff like this, Commissioner Linville, but I have today. Gary Kuntz, an employee of Forsyth County, is wearing the color pink. Kelly from the Winston-Salem Forsyth County School System is wearing pink. And I just discovered that Commissioner Ted Kaplan is wearing pink socks. I don't know if that's karma or if it means anything, but I thought I'd mention that before I gavel everybody to a recess. We're recessed.